Hello, everyone, and welcome back to our virtual Mishnah Dirshu Mishnah Berurah share. We are holding in Mishnah Berurah Chelik Hey. We're going to be learning today Daf Kuf Beis Amid Beis. That's today's Daf in Dirshu Daf Yomi Bahalacha. We began, of course, Hilchos Yom Tov. We are in Siman Tov Tzadik Hey, and we begin today on Kuf Beis Amid Aleph in the middle of Siman Tov Tzadik Hey Siv Dalet. So we have been discussing the topic of Muktzeh on Yom Tov. And if you remember yesterday, we mentioned two different opinions. We had the opinion of the Mechaber, and the Mechaber mentioned that there are some types of items that you would technically call Muktzeh, and on Shabbos, these items are really mutter betiltel. You're allowed to handle them. So while they would seem to be things that are Muktzeh, they seem to be things that you are separated from on Yom Tov. And one of the examples that we had were, let's say, apples that you put into sacks and you would put them away for schera. You're intending on selling them. So really, you kind of removed yourself from them because really your intention is to sell them. Yet, on Shabbos, those apples would be mutter. However, the Mechaber said on Yom Tov, we're actually more machmir when it comes to Muktzeh, and on Yom Tov, there would be aser. And the Mishnah Berurah explained that the reason why, according to the Mechaber, we're more machmer on Muktzeh on Yom Tov than we are on Shabbos is because Shabbos is a davar chamur. Everybody recognizes the chumrah of Shabbos. And therefore, we're not afraid that if you're mekel on Muktzeh on Shabbos, people are going to come to be mekel on other halachas of Shabbos. But Yom Tov has some built-in kulas. We know on Yom Tov you're allowed to do malacha for eichel nefesh. So on Yom Tov, we're used to cooking. There are malachas that we're used to doing on Yom Tov. So Yom Tov feels already a little bit more kal than Shabbos. And therefore, the Chachamim were afraid if we're going to be mekel on Muktzeh on Yom Tov, it's going to come to other kulas. So the sheet of the Mechaber was even these kinds of Muktzeh that are really mutter on Shabbos, they're aser on Yom Tov. That was the opinion of the Mechaber. And then the Ramah brought down the Yesh Matirin. The Ramah said that no, there are others that hold that on Yom Tov, such ches are not Muktzeh. Now we pick up, it's the second line from the bottom in the words of the Ramah, right by the Ois Katni Yud Ches for the Mishnah Berurah. The Ramah says, V'chol Muktzeh she'enoi balei chayim. Now, this Ramah is referring to the Shita of the Mechaber. According to the Shita of the Mechaber, and those that are machmir when it comes to Muktzeh on Yom Tov, in that case, v'chol Muktzeh she'enoi balei chayim, if you're dealing with these kinds of Muktzeh that are mutter on Shabbos, but we're saying that they're aser on Yom Tov, as long as they are not balei chayim, as long as they're not live animals. Kigon, for example, oitzer shel peiros ve'etzim. Let's say you have a storage house where you keep peiros, you keep produce. So you have a produce storage room. Now, the produce that you put into that storage room, that's not produce that you really intend on using on Shabbos. That's long-term storage. So again, here we have an item that to some extent you're removed from. You don't really intend on using that now. You don't have in your das that you're going to use those apples that you put into storage. So that's a perfect example of this kind of Muktzeh that the Mechaber is machmer on Yom Tov, and the Ramah was mekel. Now, says the Ramah, according to the Shita of the Mechaber, and those that are machmer, so now you have apples like this that you put into storage, or you have firewood that you put into storage. People who use a lot of firewood, they generally have one area, maybe right outside in the back, where they have the firewood that when they have to make a fire, that's the firewood that they take. And then somewhere else, they have a big oitzer, they have a big storage house of firewood. When they have to refill their wood pile, they go out to the storage room and they take firewood from the storage room. Again, that firewood is an item that to some extent you are Muktzeh it midaitai. You don't have it in your mind anymore that you're going to use that wood imminently. That wood is in storage. So again, that's a perfect example of where the Mechaber would be machmir on Yom Tov, and he would say even though that kind of Muktzeh, where mekel on Shabbos, But on Yom Tov, of course, firewood would be usher on Shabbos anyway. But the apples, let's say, that you put into the Eitzer, so on Shabbos we would be makel, and we would say Shabbos afternoon you have a hankering for an apple. You could go take that apple, but on Yom Tov we're not going to be makel, according to the Mechaber. On Yom Tov, we would say that those apples are Muktzeh. Now, says the Ramah, if we're dealing with that kind of Muktzeh, according to the Shittas that are Machmir, as long as the Muktzeh item that we're dealing with is not Bali Chayim, if it's not a live animal, so if it's, let's say, these apples that you put into storage, what can you do to be mechin them? What could you do to prepare them for Yom Tov use so that you should be allowed to use it on Yom Tov? You're going into Yom Tov and you know that you have apples in storage, and you know that there's a possibility that you might want to use those apples on Yom Tov, but they're apples that you already put in storage. How could you be making them for Yom Tov use? Says the Ramah on the bottom line, Sagi, it would be enough, Kishayoymar, if you will say, Mikan ani noitel. In other words, you look at the Eitzer and you say, I'm going to take apples from the Eitzer on Yom Tov. Ve'ein sarich sheyir shoym. However, you do not have to go into the storage room and mark off a sack or an area and say, I'm being making this sack of apples, or I'm being making the apples that are in this corner. I'm making a mark on the wall, or I'm making a mark on the sack. I'm being making them for Yom Tov use. The Ramah says, when we're dealing with this kind of Muktzeh, it's not so chamradik that you have to actually go do a maisa, do an act to be making them for Yom Tov use. It's enough if you just say, I'm going to take from the storage room. As a matter of fact, there are those that say that you don't even have to verbalize it. You could just think it. With hearer alone, it's enough. If I had in mind, if I need extra apples, I'm going to take from the storage room. Now it's considered meichin, and now you could use it on Yom Tov, even according to the Machmirim. Okay, let's take a look at the Mishnah Berurah Ois Katan Yud Ches. Just turning down the air conditioner over there a little. Okay, says the Mishnah Berurah Ois Katan Yud Ches. The Chol Muktzeh, says the Chavetz Chaim. Of course, the words of the Ramah over here, Koi Lasvara Harishayna, the Muktzeh Aser. The Ramah is discussing the opinions that are Machmir and hold that these kinds of Muktzeh are Aser on Yom Tov. Del Hamatirin Muktzeh, because according to those Shittas like the Ramah himself, who brought down the Yesh Matirin, and we saw that the Mishnah Berurah is going to say later that that's what we follow, that's our minute. So there are, according to the Matirin, who say that there is these kinds of items are not Muktzeh, they're not Aser on Yom Tov. The same way they're not Aser on Shabbos, ain't Sarach Amira. You don't need any kind of Hachana. You don't have to be making them for Yom Tov use. They're automatically mutter for Yom Tov use. Ella b'groi grois v'tzimukim. You want to have an example of something that you would have to be making for Yom Tov use, even according to those makilim, even according to the Shittas who hold that something that's not Asr on Shabbos is not Asr on Yom Tov. A case would be groi grois v'tzimukim. If you have dried figs or you have raisins, what does that mean? You had figs and you put them up on the roof to dry. You put them out in the sun to dry. You had grapes, you put them out in the sun to dry for raisins. Oh, in that case, mishum de mistama dachinu biyadayim keshehalon legag liyavshan. Over there, that's not something that's muktzeh because, let's say, the apples that you put in storage. The apples that you put in storage, so mistama, you are maktzeh midaitoi. Over here, if you put out figs or grapes to dry and become dried fruit, you are madched them biyadayim. You, by putting them out in the sun, you did a maisa to separate yourself from them. Because when you put them out to dry, for a while, they become not royal achila. So that means you really made up your mind, I am setting aside this stuff to dry. So until it's dry, you're not using it. So something like groi grois v'tzimukim, that's much more chamradik. That you have to be much more machmir by those, because you are matcha them biyodayim. Va'afilu b'Shabbos aser. That would be an example of something that's aser al muktzeh even on Shabbos. We wouldn't be making on those even on Shabbos. U'kedola'el b'simin shin yud siv beis. Now we go to his cut yud tes. The Ramah gave a caveat to this halacha. The Ramah said, when do we say that these kind of items don't need a hachana biyadayim? You don't have to mark them off to be making them. It's enough just to say, I'm going to take from here, or maybe not even to verbalize it, even to think it. The Ramah said that's true as long as the Muktzeh items that we're talking about are not balei chayim. But if they're live animals, then you need a higher degree of hachana. Says the Chavetz Chaim, and it's cutting your test. She'enoi balei chayim. This is true by items that are not live beings. The balei chayim, because if we're talking about animals, loy mahani b'sheyoymar mikan ani noitel. Then, in order to be making them, what kind of animals are we talking about? Let's say, we spoke about this example yesterday. Let's say you have egg-laying hens. Egg-laying hens are not considered muchan for shchita, according to the Machmirim. According to the Machmirim, again, this is a perfect example of the difference between the Mechaber and the Yesh Matirin brought by the Ramah. According to the Mechaber, an egg-laying hen is something that really you are Muktzeh it midaito. You're not intending on shechting an egg-laying hen. You have that hen for its eggs. You don't want to shecht it for Yom Tov use. So according to the Mechaber, that's something which is Muktzeh. You're not allowed to take it on Yom Tov and go ahead and use it for shechita. The Ramah said that such items are not Muktzeh on Yom Tov. However, according to the Machmirim, if you want to use an egg-laying hen on Yom Tov, you have to do something on Erev Yom Tov to be making it. Now, is this also something that you could just be making by looking at your chicken coop and saying, on Yom Tov, I'm going to take from the chicken coop? Says the Ramah, no. By balei chayim, you need a higher degree of hachana. And explains the Mishnah Berurah over here why. All he says is, it's not enough to say mikan ani noitel, el tzarich lefaret zeva zeh ani noitel. You would have to go to the chicken coop and you would have to point to the chickens that you want to take. And you have to say, I'm taking that chicken on Yom Tov. I'm being making that chicken. I'm going to shecht that chicken on Yom Tov. The Chamavur lekamon Siman Tov Tzadik Zayin Sif Yud. The reason for this is explained later on in Tov Tzadik Zayin Sif Yud. I looked at it quickly, and I think I'm remembering properly. The reason why balei chayim need a greater degree of hachana is because by an apple, if you look at the storage house and you say, I'm going to take from the storage house. All right, you're going to go into the storage house on Yom Tov, and you're going to find 5 nice apples. No problem. You'll make your fruit salad. But when it comes to balei chayim, let's say you go to the chicken coop and you say, mikan ani noitel. I'm going to take chickens from the coop. Now, on Yom Tov, when it comes time to take, you come to the coop and you pick up a chicken and you say, oh, I thought I was going to take this chicken to shecht it and use it on Yom Tov. But now that I'm feeling the chicken, it looks very scrawny. I thought it was a much heftier chicken. I thought I'd have a nice meal out of it. I see it's not doing so good. You know what? I'm not going to use it. And now you're going to put it down and you're going to walk away. Now what happened? Now you were metaltal Muktzeh on Yom Tov shaloi l'tzairich. The only reason it was mutter is because you were making it for Yom Tov use. So now it's like nefesh. You could go take a check and cook it and eat it. But by balei chayim, we're afraid. Unless you go out on Erev Yom Tov and you actually pick up the chicken and you say, this one, I'm going to use this one on Yom Tov, then you picked it up, you held it, you felt it. So now we trust the fact that you're actually going to use it on Yom Tov. But if you don't do that, if you just look at the chicken coop and say, mikan ani noitel, then you might come out on Yom Tov and decide that you don't want to use it. That's a problem. That's why balei chayim need a higher degree of hachana. The Ramah said an example of something that's not a bal chai, that you can be making it just by saying mikan ani noitel, and you don't have to do a ma'aser, you don't have to mark it off. Kigoin oitzer, says the Chavetz Chaim. Ritzayna loymar, what the Ramah wants to say is, v'daito yehoya mitchila rak lehistapik mimeno la'achar zman. We're talking about an oitzer where you put your apples in for storage, and your mindset was, the apples that are in the storage house, I'm not using them for a long time yet. That's why it falls under this category of this type of muktzeh. It's something that to a certain extent you are Muktzeh midaito. The same thing would apply to the apples that you put in sacks and you're planning on selling them. Also, to a certain extent, you are Muktzeh them midaito because you intend on selling them. Or if you have goluyos v'tzimukim, if you have these dried figs and these dried raisins and you put them out to dry and they're not fully dry yet. So this is another example, right? The machmirim say that you have to be making them. The matirim, don't get confused. The Chavetz Chaim said earlier by goluyos and tzimukim that even the mekilim, even the shittas that are mekel, like the Yesh Matirim and the Ramah, who say that there is no Muktzeh on Yom Tov, they're maskim by goluyos and tzimukim that there is Muktzeh on Yom Tov. But now, both according to the mekilim and according to the machmirim, who both hold that there is Muktzeh, there is an Isser by goluyos and tzimukim, because you are matcha them biyodayim, but they would all agree that the level of hachana that you need is only to say mikan ani noitel. You don't have to do an act. You don't have to mark them off for use on Yom Tov. It's enough for you to just say mikan ani noitel. Because the ones that you'll choose for your use tomorrow, since before Yom Tov you said mikan ani noitel, so then on Yom Tov when you actually take the apples, it's hovrar adavar lemafreya. We say retroactive. Now that we see which ones you picked, we say retroactively those are the ones that you had your das on. The b'milsa d'Rabbanan kaimelon d'yesh Berurah, because by an issa d'Rabbanan like this, we know that throughout Shas we always have this question of yesh Berurah or ein Berurah. Do we make these kind of decisions retroactive? Do we say that when somebody picked something, so now it goes, that picking is effective retroactive? You said before Yom Tov, mikan ani noitel, but you didn't say specifically which one. But now on Yom Tov, when you pick the apple, it's hovrar adavar lemafreya. We say that retroactively, now we know which apple you were talking about when you said mikan ani noitel. So that's question of yesh Berurah or ein Berurah is a shayla all over Shas. But by an issa d'Rabbanan, we pass in yesh Berurah. We don't require you to actually make an act. However, you should know the yesh kama paiskim the pligi alzeh. The Chavetz Chaim gives a whole list here in Sharatzia and Ois Katan Lamed Gimel of paiskim that disagree with this. The Daitam, and their opinion is the loisagi b'sheyomer mikan. It's not enough if you just say mikan ani noitel. Ela tzarich sheyirshayim b'simen hamakom shebedaitoi lechol. You actually have to make a mark that this is what I'm taking to eat. Usfarasam, and the reason they hold this way is the kevon shehem muktzeh machmas ma'aseh she'asa behem lahaktzosam. These opinions hold that something like peiros that you put into the oitzer, something like the apples that you put into the storage room, those two, you are muktzeh them biyodayim to a certain extent, right? Because you put them into the storage room. Kigayin goluyos v'tzimukim shehela gagli avshan. Ayafilu perishech nisam loitzer. Harei hiktzam biyodayim lemechira. When you take the apples, the sacks of apples, and you put them into the garage, and you delineate that these are the apples that I'm putting up for sale next week, so you are muktzeh them biyodayim. The same way you are muktzeh the goluyos and tzimukim biyodayim. You did an act, you put them in the garage, and you said, I'm using these for schayra. So that's also, you are muktzeh them biyodayim. So these paiskim disagree with the Ramah, and they say, why is it enough to say mikan ani noitel? You need a higher degree of hachana. The degree of hachana that you need is you have to actually mark them off for Yom Tov use. It's not enough with a lightweight hachana to just say mikan ani noitel. Rather, you have to actually select the produce that you're going to use on Yom Tov, the yitain bohem siman, and you have to make a mark on them. And as far as the halacha is concerned, halacha l'maisa, the Mishnah Berurah says, yesh lahachmir kisvara ha'achrona. It would be proper to rule stringently, like this second opinion. Al kol panim le'inyan goluyos v'tzimukim shehelon legag. At least by the goluyos and the tzimukim, the dried fruits that you put out to dry. Now, if you look at Ois Katan Lamed Vav, I'm going to pick and choose the words that I read here from the Sharatzia. In the Sharatzia, Ois Katan Lamed Vav, he brings down two svaras why the goluyos and the tzimukim are more chamor than the peroi shechnisu la'itzer. So let's look at it first from a very high level. The goluyos, and by both the goluyos and the tzimukim and the peroi shechnisam la'itzer, you did a maisa to be Muktzeh them midas. By the goluyos and the tzimukim, you took fresh figs and you took fresh grapes and you put them up on the roof in the sun to dry. By the peroi shechnisam la'itzer, you took apples and you put them into the storage room. In both cases, you took produce and you put them in a location which shows that you don't have intent to imminently use them. So what's the difference between the two? Why should we be machmir more by goluyos and tzimukim than peroi shechnisam la'itzer? Yet the Chavetz Chaim over here is going to differentiate between the two. He says by goluyos and tzimukim, we should be more machmir, and we should rule like the second opinion, and we should say it's not enough to say mikan ani noipel, to be making them for Yom Tov use. You have to actually mark them off for Yom Tov use. But by the peroi shechnisam la'itzer, over there, the Mishnah Berurah is going to say maybe we could rely on the first opinion and we could be making. What's the difference? So the Chavetz Chaim in the Sharitzian Ois Katan Lamed Vav, he says that by the goluyos and tzimukim, we have to understand what happens during the process of drying fruit. When they would take fresh fruit and put them up on the roof to dry, during the initial part of the drying process, the fruit actually becomes einoi roya la'achila. There is a period in time where it's not roya la'achila, or where at least it's only roya la'achila for certain people. So over there, it's much more that you are Muktzeh them midas, because you didn't just put them out to dry, you put them in a matziv where they're going to become not roya la'achila for a while. That's not true by that's not true by the peroi shechnisam la'itzer. By the peroi shechnisam la'itzer, they never become not roya la'achila. Okay. So while it's true that you put them in the garage and your mindset was I'm going to sell those apples, but they're perfectly edible. And if on Yom Tov you fall short of apples, why wouldn't you go into the storage room and take apples? So that's why you could be makel more. And that's why the Mishnah Berurah continues here, and he says by the ice cotton, right a few words before the ice cotton lamed zayin for the Sharitzian, the Mishnah Berurah says, by the apples that you put into storage, maybe then we could be more lenient and we could rely on the first opinion. Because over there, it's not so much that you are matche them. They're still eminently usable. Now we go into the words of the Ramah on the top of Kuf Beis Amid Beis by the Ois Katan Chav Gimel for the Mishnah Berurah. Says the Ramah, and these words, there's a lot of context behind these words. Don't take the words of the Ramah that we're about to read at face value. Says the Ramah, Umuter lahachin miyom tov rishon l'sheni b'shnei yamim tovim shel goluyos. When you have the 2 days Yom Tov of goluyos, so you have shvi shel Pesach and achron shel Pesach, you're allowed to do hachana from shvi shel Pesach for achron shel Pesach. Now everybody's thinking, what? Wow, what does that mean? We know that shvi shel Pesach by night, the night going into achron, right? Muktzeh shvi shel Pesach, we know we have to wait in order to prepare our night Yom Tov meal for Achron. We have to wait until after the Siman. We have to wait until Shvi is over because we're not allowed to do Achana from Shvi to Achron. We know that by the second Seder, we have to wait until Muktzeh of the first day of Pesach in order to make preparations for the Seder, for the second Seder, because you're not allowed to do Achana from the first day to the second day. So what does this Ramah mean over here that you're allowed to do Achana from Yom Tov Rishon to Yom Tov Sheni shel goluyos? So of course, the answer is in the Mishnah Berurah that the Ramah is talking about a very specific halacha. Says the Mishnah Berurah, nice Katan Chav Gimel, Umuter lahachin, it is permissible to do Achana from the first day of Yom Tov to the Yom Tov Sheni shel goluyos. Ritzana leimar. What the Ramah wants to say over here is, like in this case, we're talking about in the context of Muktzeh. So when it comes to the shaila of doing something to be meichin, something that was somewhat Muktzeh, right? Again, according to the Machmirim that these kinds of items are Muktzeh on Yom Tov. So you have your apples that you put into the storage room. And we said that you have to make some level of hachana. You have to be making the apples for Yom Tov use. If you don't, then according to the Mechaber, according to the Machmirim, these apples that you put into storage are Muktzeh and you're not allowed to use them on Yom Tov. So now, let's say today is Shvi Shel Pesach. It's not Erev Yom Tov anymore. It's Yom Tov is already upon us. It's Shvi Shel Pesach. And on Shvi Shel Pesach, I realized that I want to make an apple pie tomorrow on Achron. And I open the refrigerator and I see I have no apples left. And I remember that I have apples in the storage room. But I remember the Dirshu share, and I remember that according to the Machmirim, those apples that are in the storage room are Muktzeh. And I have to make hachana. I have to be making them. Am I allowed to be making them on Shvi Shel Pesach for Achron Shel Pesach? Or is that considered an act of hachana that I'm doing hachana on Shvi for Achron? And we know that you're not allowed to do hachana from one day of Yom Tov to the second day of Yom Tov. That's the halacha that the Ramah is addressing. So says the Mishnah Berurah, Ritzaynai Loimar. What the Ramah wants to say over here is the bekigayin zeh, in this kind of case that we're discussing, shel peros va'itzer she'ein tzarich lasais ma'aseh. When we're talking about the apples that are in the storage room, and we said you have to be making them for Yom Tov use, and we said you don't have to do a ma'aseh. You don't have to mark them off to be making them. It's enough just to say mikan ani noitel. So uva amira ba'alma hevi achana. So all you have to do to be making them is simply make an amira ba'alma. Mutter lahachin afilu b'yom tov gufei miyom echad l'chaveiroi. In that case, the Ramah says that type of hachana you're allowed to do from one day Yom Tov to the next day Yom Tov, because you're not doing a ma'aseh of hachana. All you're doing is you're making an amira. You're just making a verbal statement. I'm going to use apples from the storage room tomorrow to make an apple pie. So that level of hachana you're allowed to do from one day of Yom Tov to Yom Tov sheni. And the Mishnah Berurah explains, why is this? The miman of shach. Because in the context of this shaila, we could say a miman of shach. Im yom sheni kodesh. Let's remember, Yom Tov sheni shel goluyos is a suffix. And we're going to discuss this in greater detail in the next Siman. Why do we have Yom Tov sheni shel goluyos? Because of Sveika de Yoma. So say like this: Im Yom sheni kodesh. If the real day of Yom Tov is the second day of Yom Tov is Achron, Harei hayom chol. So then today's Shvi is really Chalamayid. You're allowed to do hachana from Chalamayid to Yom Tov. What's the problem? No problem. V'im hayom kodesh. And if today Shvi is really Yom Tov, so today is Kodesh, Machar Chol, so then Achron is really a weekday, Harei Ein Tzarich Hachana Klal. So then the verbal statement that I'm making, that I'm being making these apples for use for tomorrow, is not a hachana at all. It's totally ineffective. It doesn't accomplish anything at all, because it doesn't need hachana. Tomorrow's a weekday. I can make as many apple pies as I want from whatever apples I want. V'nimtza she'ena misakin shum davar b'achanasai delayasar alav. So I'm not being misakin anything. What am I doing with my verbal statement? I'm not accomplishing anything at all. So how could you tell me that that's usr? There's no isser involved in it. When is hachana usr to go? When is it usr to do hachana on one day of Yom Tov for the other one? Only when you're actually doing something. And why is that usr? Why is it usr to do hachana on Shvi Shel Pesach for Achron Shel Pesach? The reason it's usr is because we're afraid maybe machar, maybe Achron Shel Pesach is really a weekday. So Shvi Shel Pesach is Kodesh, and maybe Achron is really Chol. Well, in that case, if you did hachana, if you started preparing on Shvi Shel Pesach for your Achron Shel Pesach night Suda, you're cooking on Shvi Shel Pesach, and now it turns out that really Achron Shel Pesach is really a weekday, so that means that you cooked on Shvi Shel Pesach for a weekday. You're not allowed to do that. That's why Achana is usher. But that doesn't apply over here in our case, because you're not doing a ma'aseh. All you're doing is making a verbal statement. Now in the brackets over here, the Mishnah Berurah says, "V'chein b'muktzeh de balei chayim." This is also true by muktzeh of live animals, kigoyin tarnagolos ha'imedes l'galgal beitzim, like the egg-laying hen, which we said that over there you need a higher degree of hachana. Lo yachal lahazbin miyom tov l'chaveroi. Again, you can't do the hachana for, let's say, shvi shel Pesach, for achron shel Pesach. Ela im kain zimein me erev Yom Tov. You would have to do that hachana on erev Yom Tov. Why? Because of the same svara that we discussed earlier in this year. What are you going to do? You're going to go ahead and you're going to be mazmin the hen on shvi shel Pesach so that you could shecht it on achron. How are you going to be mazmin it? We said that the way you have to be mazmin it is you have to actually go out to the chicken coop, pick up the chicken, and say, I'm going to shecht this chicken tomorrow. Well, now, what happens if you do that, and then tomorrow you decide that you're not shechting it? I have a problem. You with metaltal muktzeh for no reason. Continues the Mishnah Berurah lefi zeh, lefi ma shekasavnu lahachmir b'muktzeh. This that we said, that you have to be machmir by muktzeh, the aktzia b'yadayim kigon gregoris v'tzimuchim shetzarech lirshaim. When it comes to the type of muktzeh that you are actually maktzeh b'yadayim, when we said it's not enough to make a simple verbal achana, but you have to do a maisa, then if you didn't make that mark on erev Yom Tov, if you didn't do the maisa of achana on erev Yom Tov, menizkar b'Yom Tov, and you first remembered to do it on Yom Tov, asar lasei shum siman lahachin peris liyom Tov sheni. That you would not be allowed to do on shvi for achron. The shema marcha chayil v'nimchas shasa siman b'Yom Tov l'tzarech chayil. Okay, that concludes Siman Tov Tzadik Hey. Let's start off Siman Tov Tzadik Vav, and by doing so, we'll stay on the Dirshu schedule. Now, Siman Tov Tzadik Vav is a fascinating siman. Dine Yom Tov sheni shel goluyos, the halachas that govern Yom Tov sheni shel goluyos. This mysterious second day of Yom Tov that we have in Chutz La'aretz, Yom Tov sheni shel goluyos, that we all say it's because of Sveika D'Yoma, because we don't know for sure which day is Yom Tov. Dine Yom Tov sheni shel goluyos u'bay gimel se'ifim. Says the Mechaber, Begoluyos she'osin shnei yomim tovim misafik. In Golus, when we have 2 days of Yom Tov because of Sveika D'Yoma, kol ma she'asar b'rishon, asar b'sheni. Everything that's asar on the first day of Yom Tov is asar on the second day of Yom Tov, and continues the Mechaber, v'hayu menadin lemi she'mezalzel bay. And indeed, we put somebody who treats Yom Tov sheni shel goluyos in a lightweight manner. If he's mezalzel in Yom Tov sheni shel goluyos, we put him in chayrim. Let's take a look at the Mishnah Berurah. Mishnah Berurah is cut in aleph. V'hayu menadin. First says the Chavetz Chaim, what is this Yom Tov sheni shel goluyos of Sveika D'Yoma? What Sveika D'Yoma is there? Even though we have no suffix now, what kind of suffix? We take out a calendar, we look in the Luach, we know when Yundala Nisan is, we know when Tezvav Nisan is, we know when Tezayin Nisan is. Tezvav is Yom Tov, Tezayin is Chol Hamoed. What kind of Sveika D'Yoma is there? There's no Sveika D'Yoma. We have it calculated out now. Take out your iPhone and go onto the Luach app and go to the go-to date and find out when Pesach is in 2033 or 2099. Hopefully Mashiach will come by then. And we won't have any of this nonsense. And we'll have a Sanhedrin. And we'll know because Pesach was Mekadosh the Chodesh and the Lishkas HaGazos, not because of the Chishbainis that we have. Halavai, it should be soon. But right now, we use a Luach, and we have the Luach in our hands. So we have no Sveika D'Yoma. Mikamakam, nevertheless, says the Chavetz Chaim, Chasheshu Chachamim, the Chachamim were afraid. They were concerned. Shema meroiv hatzaros v'hatiltulim begaluseinu. Maybe because of all of our oppression and all of the tzaros that we go through, and the tiltulim, where we travel from one end of the world to the other, we're getting thrown out from this country, we're going to that country, and on and on and on. Yishtakach hacheshbain. It's very nice that right now we have a luach, but that luach could become forgotten. V'yavayu laseis chaser mole umole chaser. We might mix up the calendar once again, and we'll make a month a mole when really it should have been a chaser. We'll make another month a chaser when it should have been a mole. And I guess we're not gonna extrapolate the problem on and on and on, because they didn't l'davar safe. But the Chachamim were afraid that even now that we have the Luach, we still could end up in a situation where we're a day off. V'yochlu chametz b'Pesach, and you might come to eat chametz on Pesach, right? You'll be a day off, and you'll think Pesach starts a day later than it really did. And therefore, they left this minig in place. Minig aviseinu b'yadenu. They left the minig of Yom Tov sheni shel goluyos in its place. Now, there's a couple of fascinating footnotes over here in the Dirshu. If you look at Dirshu footnote number 1, he tackles a very interesting question. How about Shavuos? What kind of Sveika Yomi could there possibly be on Shavuos? We know that Shavuos is 50 days after the second day of Pesach. So whatever we held as the second day of Pesach, 50 days later has to be Shavuos. So how do we have a Sveika Yomi? So he says over here, he brings down from the Chassam Sefer, Shemikol Mokum Tikdu Chachamim Linoid Bo Shnei Yomim Tovim Kedin Pesach V'Sukkos. Once they had a takana of a Yom Tov sheni shel goluyos by Pesach and Sukkos, they put that takana in place on Shavuos as well, even though there doesn't seem to be a place for it. Av she'ein safek klal sha'ayom hasheni any Yom Tov, even though there's no question. The second day of Shavuos is simply not Yom Tov. It's not Yom Tov. The first day of Shavuos is Yom Tov. Kedei shaloi lechalik ben Yom Tov l'Yom Tov. They did this so that Shavuos should not be any different than any other Yom Tov. Now get a load of this. The Chassam Sefer says that since the Chazal were misaken the Yom Tov sheni shel goluyos on Shavuos, even though on Shavuos there's no mokum at all for a Sveika Diyuma, shekevan shetikdu chachamim linoig b'Shavuos Yom Tov sheni b'taras vadai v'loy mach masafik chamer Yom Tov sheni zem Yom Tov sheni shel Pesach v'Sukkos. Yom Tov sheni of Shavuos has a more stringent halacha than Yom Tov sheni of Pesach and Sukkos, because Yom Tov sheni of Pesach and Sukkos is geboit on a suffix. It's based on the concept of Sveika Diyuma. But Yom Tov sheni of Shavuos is never based on Sveika Diyuma. And yet Chazal will masakin Yom Tov sheni of Shavuos anyway. Well, in that case, it has a more stringent din, because its din is not a suffix, its din is a vada. Okay, we're going to stop over here. I think we'll continue with some Dirshu footnotes tomorrow, and then we'll go weiter. Well, there is no tomorrow. It's next week. On Sunday, Mir Hashem. Everyone should have a wonderful, wonderful Shabbos. Thank you so much for joining me for limud HaTorah. The schools of limud HaTorah should be making against Klal Yisrael. The Rebbe Shalom should send Yeshua's for Fuas and Parnasa to everyone. We should be Zaychet to the Bias Gal Tzedek B'Meher V'Yameinu. Be well.